is starting to be understood, and we're hoping that more people will come on board and support the overview of mobility parking.
All right, good on you, BJ. Thank you. BJ Clark on the panel. Amazon is entering the courier business in America. That news today, and maybe more significantly, it's entering the pharmacy business. It's trying to disrupt the selling of prescription drugs. For $1 billion US, it is acquiring the online pharmacy PillPack. And this, says one of the media stories on it from the States, confirms the pharmacy sector's worst fears. So we'll get our pills and our potions online. There'll be no staff in our supermarkets. There'll be no post offices to buy stamps and weigh parcels, and there'll be no accountant to talk to you about your tax return. You won't have to sit in a university lecture theatre anymore. We said yesterday there'll be homes, a lot of homes without kitchens. Are you ready for this world, this new world, panellists? Is this the world that you like, the sound of, the one we're entering?
Are we ever ready for tomorrow's world and the things that, you know, are going to be different? I don't think this is any different to any time in the past. It's just things are changing. They're going to be different to how they've been in the past. My daughter went to university. She said, if I can't get from a university lecturer more than I can get online, why am I here paying these fees? I'll go and learn in a different way. And she went and learned in a different way through work and practical experience. So, you know, we just adapt.
Fewer and fewer opportunities, though, to talk to people, obviously. To be part of a community, socialise, talk to the pharmacist, talk to the person behind the counter at the post office. I mean, you won't need to get out as much. Can that be good? I take your point, and that's probably the right point. But
I'm hoping we'll use all that time doing volunteer and community work, and we'll connect on a different level, Jim.
Foregoing our winter energy payments.
You can always talk to these virtual assistants anyway, Jim, and these people that are the AR, and they'll give you a great conversation.
It is not the same. It is not the same for your mental health and well-being.
No, they really care about you.
What do you mean, Delwyn?
Good morning, Delwyn. In Europe, Ryanair has called for a limit on the number of drinks passengers can be served in European airports, and a complete ban on alcohol before 10 o'clock in the morning when you fly. And something will probably be done in this area, even if it isn't this. If it comes to you, down to you, because you're both so well-travelled, as you've been telling us through the panel, if it comes down to a choice between no booze at the airport or risking, you know, drunks starting fights and trying to open the plane door, where does your vote go here? I've phrased the question in a very cunning manner. It's getting worse and worse on planes, obviously, on the long-haul flights. You read about it all the time now.
I have never encountered a drunk and unruly person on a long-haul flight.
Maybe you're in a better class of the plane.
Well, I generally travel the same class everybody else does.
Okay, similar.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't fly that much, but I've never seen one either, but obviously it's happening.
I've only ever flown Ryanair once, and it's... I would recommend a drink before, during and after on that airline. It is a bit of a cattle transporter. But yeah, I mean, I can't understand people that like to... I mean, okay, if you're on a hen's weekend or a stag weekend, there's probably some drinking going on, but why you'd want to drink so much before you get on a flight is beyond me.
Yeah, I think it's about culture. It's about drinking culture. It's not about where you are or what you're doing, flying, driving, whatever. It's about the culture that creates that binge drinking.
Thank you both for your thoughts today. Delwyn Stewart, Mike Rahu on the panel. Nice to see you both.
Yes, I'll be wearing my asteroid belt tomorrow to celebrate Asteroid Day.
Indeed.
Yeah. And here's Checkpoint.
Tō te mara e hoa mai he kōrero, kei te haere he kaupapa, kei te whakarawhiua. Tonight on Checkpoint, nurses have called off a 24-hour strike plan for next Thursday. We have the latest. Two ministries both admit botching their responses to an Official Information Act request about their dealings with controversial security firm Thompson & Clark. What happened and why? Agriculture Minister Damien O'Connor on animal cruelty, MPI and their ability to address it. A gunman opens fire at a local newspaper office in Maryland, killing 5. New Zealand football goes on the hunt for a new chief executive after the unexpected resignation of Andy Martin this afternoon, and life as the owner of an EQC on-sold. All of that coming up.
RNZ News at 5 o'clock. Good afternoon, I'm Anna Thomas. The Nurses Union has called off its strike planned for next Thursday after receiving an updated offer from district health boards. The Employment Relations Authority has been facilitating the talks over the past 2 days after months of failed negotiations on pay and working conditions. A Nurses Union spokeswoman, C. Payne, says it'll be recommending the offer to its members on Monday and they'll vote on it next week. She says contingency planning for a second strike scheduled for July the 12th will continue in the meantime. DHBs have previously offered nurses a package worth $520 million, which includes pay increases between 9 and 15% and a 2% increase in nursing numbers. The father of Chosen Koreheke has confronted her killer in court, calling him a coward who beat the courage out of his daughter. Jason Koreheke was speaking at the sentencing of Turiarangi Tai, who murdered Miss Koreheke last year after weeks of assault. Mr. Koreheke told the court he struggled to explain what had happened to Chosen's young children, who think she's not dead but an angel. He said Tai had beaten the courage out of his daughter, who was too afraid to talk about her abuse. Mr. Koreheke said he still struggles every day with his grief.
The way she was taken and under the circumstances has damaged me. She was my baby. She was my princess. Why'd you shoot her?
Turiarangi Tai was jailed for life with a minimum non-parole period of 17 years. The acting Prime Minister says he's launching a full investigation into the appointment of the new Deputy Police Commissioner. Wally Homaha is being criticised over comments he made during the 2004 Operation Austin investigation, when he supported the police officers accused of raping a teenager, Louise Nicholas, in the 1980s. He began the 5-year role on June the 3rd. Winston Peters says he's unsure if the government was aware Mr. Homaha's comments, aware of the comments when he was offered the position.
These allegations have been made. We're going to have a full investigation as to the process, as to its adequacy, as to whether or not we heard all the information we should have heard, and ensure that the process was properly done. And we're not going to rush to judgment until we do.
The Police Minister, Stuart Nash, says he was unaware of Wally Homaha's comments, but he did know he was interviewed during Operation Austin. Mr. Homaha, meanwhile, has apologised for those comments that he made in support of his fellow officers accused of gang rape in 2004. He says he met recently with Louise Nicholas to assure her of his commitment to the work the police have done as a result of the Commission of Inquiry into police handling of sexual assault investigations. The suspect in today's shooting at a newspaper in the US state of Maryland has been identified as a 38-year-old local man named Jared Ramos. 5 people were killed and at least 2 injured when he opened fire into the newsroom at the Capital Gazette newspaper in Annapolis. The acting police chief, Bill Cramp, says the shooting appears to have been carefully planned.
This was a targeted attack on the Capital Gazette. He entered the building with a shotgun and he looked for his victims as he walked through the lower level.
Bill Camp says the offender has had a long-running feud with the newspaper over coverage of a court appearance he made in 2012. Kiwifruit growers in the Bay of Plenty who took the government to court over the vine-killing disease PSA are ecstatic at their victory. The High Court has ruled the forerunner of the Ministry for Primary Industries breached a duty of care to the growers. Eric Frickberg reports.
In her ruling, Justice Mallon found the importation of pollen from China in 2009 wasn't properly overseen by the then Ministry of Agriculture and Forestry. She said the risks should have been obvious, but the ministry didn't exercise reasonable care in preparing a research paper concerning pests and diseases associated with pollen. The principal author of that paper had a different understanding of its scope, which meant some key information was omitted. The Ministry for Primary Industries says it'll study the lengthy judgment before making comment. This is Eric Frickberg.
Today is the Families Commission's last day. A bill disestablishing it was passed this week. The commission was set up by a Labour-led government in 2003, but the current government has taken a different view of its usefulness. The previous National-led government had also planned to remove it and supported the bill doing so. It's 5:05. The unexpected resignation of Chief Executive Andy Martin has New Zealand football looking for a new person to head their organisation. Effective immediately, Martin's decision to quit was confirmed by the national body in a statement earlier this afternoon. Martin has been under pressure for his handling of complaints about the coach of the New Zealand women's football team, Andreas Haraf. Haraf was last week placed on special leave and an independent investigation was confirmed after letters of complaint from team members. The White Ferns captain Susie Bates says they need to maintain their levels of performance for longer periods if they're to have any chance of beating hosts England in Sunday night's T20 Tri-Series final. New Zealand crushed South Africa by 8 wickets in the first game of this morning's double-header to qualify for the title match before losing to England by 7 wickets in the second match, their second humbling at the hands of the hosts this series. Bates says they have the game to beat England. They just need to perform when it matters.
We've just got to take what we do against South Africa and do it for longer. We're going to be put under more pressure with their bowling attack because they've got some world-class bowlers, but nothing changes in terms of our partnerships, and everyone in our batting lineup has the ability. We've just got to sustain their pressure for longer.
Susie Bates. And the Blues are looking to send Jerome Kaino off with victory when he plays his last game at Eden Park in their Super Rugby clash against the Reds tonight. The match kicks off at 7:35. And that's the news.
I'm a real wild one.
Tonight on Nights, we kick off Friday with a sonic tonic dedicated to keeping it really real. At 9, a taste of things away from the glare of the city lights and country life. And at 11, this week's mixtape selector is singer-songwriter Charlotte Yates.
And after 10, new angles on news stories of the day, and maybe a few tips for healthier homes.
It's less cost to the taxpayer. It's also better environmental outcomes.
And that kind of a house would have a water tank that's collecting rainwater, right? So you don't need so much water coming in and less water's going out.
Yeah, and it would also have water-efficient shower and toilet and bath, and it means less water treatment from the water provider.
Lately with me, Brian Crump, filling in for Karen Hay. Part of Nights on RNZ National.
And now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight. Tomorrow from Northland to Waikato, also Coromandel Bay of Plenty, Gisborne, Hawke's Bay, Wairarapa. Mostly fine, however isolated showers about the coast from Gisborne to Wairarapa, clearing early tomorrow morning. And the remainder of the North Island fine, with cloudy periods and isolated showers developing tomorrow morning. Bulla, Westland, Fiordland, a few showers spreading further north tomorrow and turning to rain in Fiordland tomorrow night. Nelson, Marlborough, Canterbury and Otago excluding Clutha, mainly fine but isolated showers about Dunedin early tomorrow. Clutha and Southland, partly cloudy with a few showers, mainly about the coast, possibly heavy but becoming fine tomorrow. And for the Chatham Islands, often cloudy with showers. RNZ National, it's 5:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint with John Campbell.
Thank you very much indeed, Anna Thomas. Thank you everyone for being with us. It's a busy old Friday, so let's get into it. Nurses have called off a 24-hour strike plan for next Thursday after DHB's made a new pay offer. Thousands of nurses had been planning to walk off the wards following months of failed talks with DHB's about pay and working conditions. But late this afternoon, the union released a statement saying the strike was off. Our excellent reporter, Nita Blake-Person, has been covering the talks and she is beside me in the studio now. Hi, Nita. What's happened today? This is a little bit out of the blue.
Yeah, just breaking in the past hour. So there's talks have been underway between the Nurses Union, the DHBs, and at the last minute, the Employment Relations Authorities come in because they've been at this impasse basically for months over how to get a deal that nurses are happy with. So in the past hour, the Nurses Union put out a statement which said that there was this new offer on the table which they were willing to put to their members, and if that's deemed to be acceptable, the second lot of strikes will be off, but either way, the first one is off from Thursday. There will be no strike.
So that is a good faith response from the union, isn't it? Even though their members don't yet know what's in the offer, right? And do we know what's in the offer? Does anyone know what's in the offer other than the negotiating parties?
At this stage, no. So we had this $520 million offer that was on the table. That included increases of between 9 and 15% for staff, as well as a 2% increase in nursing numbers. Most nurses said that didn't even go nearly far enough, but the government and DHBs have said there's no more money in the kitty. So we can only assume that whatever's happened today is a rearrangement of that package, but the union thinks it's enough, at least to put to their members to see what they think.
And in the meantime, call the strike off.
The first one. So the vote will take place from Tuesday to the following Monday. That takes us to the 9th of July. That second strike was scheduled to take place on the 12th. So again, we're cutting it quite fine. Yeah. But if they can resolve it, then that second strike will be off. These strikes have huge impacts on health services. Hundreds of elective surgeries called off, thousands of appointments. So the stakes are really high here. But this is progress, this is something, and we'll have to see on Monday what's in that.
And we're going to find out on Monday afternoon what's in it, right? There's a media conference at 2 o'clock on Monday, which RNZ will stream live. We're going to have the Nurses Union on Checkpoint on Monday night. So this is a silly question, really, because the nurses don't know how they feel it because they don't know what the offer is. But in the meantime, their strike has been called off. How do they feel about that?
Well, they were really looking forward to striking. From the nurses I've spoken to, they say that they've been underworked and overpaid for years, and there was this real hunger to kind of show their conditions, and people were looking forward to striking on Thursday. So
to make the point.
To make the point. So while they're really pleased, initial responses I've seen on social media, they're welcoming the fact that the strikes have been called off. At the same time, they're keen to see what's in that offer because they had been very ready to walk off the wards come Thursday.
Nita Blackperson with the latest. Thank you so much, Nita. We really appreciate it. And on Monday night on Checkpoint, we will actually have the details of the offer when C-Payne joins us on the program. The Ministry of Social Development and Ministry for Primary Industries have both admitted to botching their responses to an Official Information Act request about Thompson and Clark, raising questions about whether the government has indeed been fully transparent around its dealings with the controversial security firm. Now, in March, Checkpoint asked government agencies for their correspondence with Thompson and Clark since the start of 2015 and copies of any contracts. Most came back and said none existed, including MPI and MSD. But since the State Services Commission investigation into the government's use of Thompson and Clark was expanded to include all agencies, both MPI and MSD have admitted they were wrong and their staff did actually have dealings with the firm. What's going on here and why? Well, our reporter who's been doing so much good work on this is Zach Fleming.
This request is refused in full as the information does not exist. That's the answer Checkpoint got back in March from several government agencies, including the Ministry of Social Development and the Ministry for Primary Industries, when we asked for correspondence between their staff and the security firm Thompson and Clark. Fast forward nearly 3 months, and both agencies now say their denial was a blunder. Their staff did have dealings with Thompson and Clark. And that raises the question, how much can we trust Official Information Act responses?
If you put in OIA requests with regard to Thompson and Clark and MPI, and MPI say there is no such information, and then later it's found out that there is, well, what are the consequences for MPI? The answer is there aren't any.
Head of Greenpeace New Zealand, Russell Norman, wants that to change. Greenpeace believes its staff were spied on by Thompson and Clark for the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment.
If CEOs were personally liable when their department breached the Official Information Act, I think they might have a more proactive view of ensuring that the people who report to them actually follow the law instead of breach the law.
Because many groups around New Zealand are banging their heads against brick walls, trying to pry information out of government departments about Thompson and Clark. MPI says it's found evidence of serious misconduct in its staff dealings with Thompson and Clark, but it's refusing to release it or explain why it won't. The police have refused to even try and search for correspondence with Thompson and Clark, saying it's too much work. Oil Free Wellington has been trying to find out whether it's been spied on since the end of last year, and Francis Mountier says it's still none the wiser.
It's not clear. We don't have the official information back to know what message they're using at the moment on our group.
She asked for information just before Christmas.
And didn't get a response until with the information until the 13th of March.
That's a month late. They got
a whole bunch of pages, like 4.6 kilograms of documents.
But
the pages that they've given us are incredibly heavily redacted, the most redacted of any Official Information Act response I've ever received. For example, one report of 100 pages is entirely redacted.
So, end result is Oil-Free Wellington has no idea if they were spied on. On top of the blunders by MPI and MSD, Checkpoints complained to the Ombudsman over the Department of Conservation's blanket refusal to release the information it gets from Thompson and Clark. Greenpeace has also complained to the Ombudsman.
We're relying on the people who don't want to give the information out to give the information out. So essentially you have this problem where the people who control the information are the same people who have an interest in the information never seeing the light of day.
The Ombudsman declined to be interviewed, but in a statement said,
I'm investigating several individual complaints in relation to official information held by agencies about Thompson and Clark. As these inquiries are ongoing, I can make no further comment.
The State Services Commission investigation into all government departments' dealings with Thompson and Clark isn't hamstrung by the OIA, but there's no date for that to be completed. MPI says it will release its correspondence with Thompson and Clark next Friday. MSD is yet to specify a date. For Checkpoint, Zach Fleming.
5:15. The kiwifruit industry has won part of its case against the government over the spread of the vine-killing disease PSA. Growers went to court seeking at least $400 million, alleging negligence by the Ministry of Agriculture and Forestry, a forerunner, of course, for what's now known as MPI, the Ministry for Primary Industries. This stemmed from the importation of pollen from China in 2009. Our Waikato Bay of Plenty reporter Andrew McRae was at the announcement in Te Puke today.
In her judgment, Justice Mallon said the ministry owed a duty of care to kiwifruit growers. It had responsibility for controlling what goods could be imported into New Zealand, and the risks of contamination should have been obvious. Grower Craig Jeffries has been in the industry for over 30 years, and the discovery of PSA changed his life.
I lost a big orchard through this, and had to go out and find work and scrimp and save and make ends meet, that sort of thing, to get through. And it's been a hard 10 years.
Another long-time kiwifruit grower, Alistair Rees, remembers all too well hearing the news that his orchard had PSA.
Sock in the stomach, saying, oh dear. And then in the first instance, I guess we all had a hope that we might be able to combat it, but that was pretty quickly dashed. And then the chainsaws came in, and just listening day after day to the we're not through this crisis yet, but we're probably through the most painful part of it.
The devastating news that PSA had struck hit grower Mike Montgomery hard.
Our equity had vanished, the properties were valueless. We had no option but to carry on and work out how to get through this. Yes, we managed to do that, so we're one of the lucky ones.
How hard did it get though?
You were living month to month at any point in time.
And Mike Montgomery says there was very little sympathy from certain banks.
So I think they may have all had the same attitude, but depending on your client status, you go from hero to zero quite quickly in that regard. So if you owed them money, you were on a watch list, and they were pretty tough on you.
They'll be chewing up now, though, maybe.
That is the nature of banks, yes.
212 growers took part in the class action, and not surprisingly, they're overjoyed by the court decision. Craig Jeffries says it comes as a huge relief.
It's vindication for the work these people have done, under our name, and it's acknowledgement of something that we knew existed, and it's long overdue.
Alistair Rees says compensation can't make good the years of stress and heartache.
Nothing replaces that, but the compensation would certainly be would be helpful.
Growers will now be on tenterhooks as the government weighs up its option to fight the decision or not. Grant Inan, who's a member of the Kiwifruit Claim Committee, says it would be wrong for an appeal to be lodged.
This isn't a floodgate case. This doesn't open the floodgates. This is very specific to 3 or 4 failures by MPI not carrying out their duties properly. And this is really about making them accountable to start doing their job.
The government's yet to decide, and it has 20 days to do so. Acting Prime Minister Winston Peters was quick to lay the blame.
Well, my reaction is to look at the party that was in government at the time and ask, how come they allowed that to happen, and a further 172 biosecurity breaches in their time of administration. Have a good hard look at them. It's going to cost us a packet, potentially, and that's a judgment yet to be made by the court.
The kiwifruit growers' lawyers will now digest the judgment and prepare for either an appeal or a hearing to determine the amount of damages they'll seek. They say it could be in the area of $500 million. The Ministry for Primary Industries says it will study the 500-plus page judgment before making any comment. In Te Puke for Checkpoint, ko Andrew McRae.
The father of chosen koroheke has spoken of the devastating impact her murder has had on her children and the rest of her family, as her killer was sentenced to life in jail. Turi Rangita shot Ms Koroheke, his girlfriend, at point-blank range last year after weeks of particularly brutal assaults. He'll spend at least 17 years in jail and appears to have narrowly avoided being sentenced to life without parole under the 3 strikes law. Reporter Rowan Quinn was at the High Court in Auckland.
Places that are good to cry, so no one knows you're crying. In my car when I'm driving, when I'm at the pools and I'm swimming, when I sit in the sauna, out the back of the yard where I work, while I'm sleeping.
Jason Koroheke talks about the impact the loss of his 22-year-old daughter, the baby of the family, and his princess has had on him. He says he puts his feelings about chosen Koroheke's death in a box, but opened that for today's sentencing. He's now the caregiver for her 2 children, who were just 2 and 4 when she was killed.
I know what they have on their toast. I know what they like for breakfast. I know what their favourite programs are. But I don't know what to say when they ask about their mother.
When they brought Chosen's body home, Jason Koroheke insisted on no casket so the children could cuddle her as if she was asleep. Her daughter has lots of questions.
She thinks her mum is an angel because we told her God needed one. I do not know what to say when she realises Chosen is gone. Things she has said to me. She asked me when she can talk to Mummy. I told her when she dreams. She said, I want to hurry up and go to sleep so I can talk to Mummy.
Addressing Turiarangi Tai, Mr Koroheke said he was angry at his lack of remorse and how he made the family endure a trial where they heard about his horrific assaults. His weapons included a metal bar, a rock and a knife.
Listening to your voice on the 111 call, that made me sick. To think the last thing my daughter heard before she died was your sickening apologies and instant regret will stick with me forever. It was not until you realised she was not going to live, you changed your tack into survival mode. 15 minutes after you shot her, you casually went to the garage, filled up with gas, got a drink and some smokes, and then paid for it with her money card.
Justice Muir said the statement was among the most moving he'd heard in his career and it would stay with him for many years. He said he hoped Tai had listened carefully to it and to those of Chosen's auntie and also her traumatised brother who witnessed a shooting. The judge said the case was an example of the scourge of family violence in New Zealand, something Tai had been a victim of as a child from his father and foster carers.
He presents today as a recidivist, violent and somewhat cowardly thug, but one fashioned by his background and at 23 still a comparatively young man.
Tai qualified to be sentenced for the maximum, life without parole, under the 3 strikes law because of an earlier conviction for serious offending. And he appeared to be close to getting it, with Justice Muir adjourning for an extra hour to consider it. Eventually, he said he'd struggled with the decision, but felt there was a chance Tai's high risk of reoffending would lessen over time.
Although it may take something of a personal epiphany, of which there are few present signs for that risk adequately to abate, I am not prepared to dismiss any prospect of rehabilitation and to say effectively that this man is beyond redemption.
Justice Muir said it would be up to the parole board in 17 years' time to decide if the spark of humanity he saw in Tai had been nurtured to anything more. I tāmaki makauro mō Checkpoint, ko Rowan Quinn tēnei.
5:24. New Zealand football are looking for a new chief executive after the unexpected resignation of Andy Martin was announced this afternoon. Effective immediately, Martin's decision to quit comes just 10 days after the national body confirmed 13 football ferns had made official complaints to the national body about their coach. The following day, that coach was placed on special leave and an independent review of the team environment was confirmed, with Martin at the time denying any prior knowledge of the extent of the issues and saying he was comfortable. It's a quote in his own position. Martin has opted to not make himself available to media today for comment on the reasons for his sudden resignation. New Zealand Football President Derek Shaw did, however, in a telephone conference with our reporter Clay Wilson a few minutes ago.
I think the board set expectations around performance, around the agreed metrics we want through our whole football plan, through our sort of financial performance, and ensuring that the organisation is strong and sort of robust. And I think, Andy's attended to those deliverables. So there's been a lot of, very positive things in football over the time of Andy's tenure.
So just to be clear, there's no regrets from a board perspective on how Andy's handled some things? Yeah,
it's not appropriate for me to comment on sort of regrets. This is not a performance review of Andy. Andy's made a decision to retire. The board respects that decision, wishes him well in the future, and meanwhile we need to move on in football. Andy's view is he's retiring. He's retiring from work. Those are his words.
New Zealand Football President Derek Shaw talking to Clay Wilson a short time ago. A gunman has opened fire at a local newspaper in Maryland, killing 5 people and injuring others in what police said was a targeted attack. Staff at the Capital Gazette in Annapolis say the attacker, armed with a shotgun and smoke grenade, shot through a glass door into the newsroom. Police have named the man as Jarrod Ramos, a 38-year-old who unsuccessfully sued the newspaper in 2012 for defamation. Graham Acton reports.
Several shots have been fired. Possible shotgun, at least 10 shots heard.
Police say they were at the office of the newspaper just a minute after the emergency call was received. Deputy Police Chief William Cramp says the attack was planned and targeted news staff from the paper.
This was a targeted attack on the Capital Gazette. He entered the building with a shotgun and he looked for his victims as he walked through the lower level. This person was prepared today to come in. This person was prepared to shoot people. His intent was to cause harm, and the investigative part of this is going to be thorough, and it's going to take some time.
Investigators are now looking into threats that had been made against the newspaper via social media. Jarrod Ramos attempted to sue the newspaper in 2012, alleging defamation over its coverage of a court appearance where he was found guilty of criminal harassment. The case was thrown out, with the judge pointing out that reporting court proceedings accurately was not defamatory. Reporters scrambled under their desks for safety as shotgun blasts shattered the newsroom's glass doors. 5 staff were killed and several seriously injured. Reporter Celine Sanfelice was in the newsroom and saw one of her colleagues being shot.
I saw him get shot, but I didn't see the gunman or anything. And he fell down. And, I heard footsteps a couple times. My purse was on the floor, just out, away from the desk, and my sunglasses were on the floor. And I'm sure I was breathing really loud, and I was trying not to, but I couldn't be quiet, and he never came to our side.
The county chief executive, Steve Shue, described the shooting as amateur hour and says the suspect was found hiding under a desk in the newsroom.
There are several people who have died from this incident, and several others are injured. I don't know what to say other than our thoughts and prayers are with them and their families.
Reporter Celine Sanfelice says the killings have shattered the paper, but staff still plan to have an edition on the stands tomorrow. She says things must change in the US.
I'm going to need more than a couple days of news coverage and some thoughts and prayers, because our whole lives have been shattered. And so thanks for your prayers, but I couldn't give a about them if there's nothing else.
Gazette police reporter Phil Davis says even his extensive experience with violence as part of his job could not prepare him for the shooting, which he says left the newsroom looking like a war zone.
This is a situation where these were people that were working in an office, who were doing their job, who had no reason, at least to the best of our knowledge, to think that someone like this would have a motive, come in there and gun down employees who were just doing their job that day, who had no seeming motive to hate this man.
Police say other newsrooms on the east coast of the US had a visit from armed police today as a precaution against potential copycat incidents. Ko Graham Acton, Tene.
You are with Checkpoint on RNZ. Thank you for being with us. 5:30 on Friday night. Coming up on the program, Agriculture Minister Damien O'Connor on animal cruelty, MPI, and the Ministry's ability to address it. The total number of people who've bought on-solds in Christchurch now sits at 685. We hear from some of them about what it's like to buy a home you are told is fine and to find out it is not. And Aucklanders flock up to fill ahead of the ahead of the 11.5 cent fuel increase that comes into effect on Sunday. We'd love your feedback. You can text us on 2101, email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. And we are, of course, on Twitter and Facebook. Business Next with Nona, who is yet to materialise, but I'm sure she will.
No, it's not Nona.
It's not Nona, it's someone else.
Yes, it is. Can't tell you who.
Thanks, Anna Thomas. Business Next with someone else. But before that, the headlines with Anna Thomas.
Thanks, John. The Nurses Union has called off next Thursday's strike after 2 days of talks resulted in a new offer from district health boards. A spokesperson for the Nurses Union says it will be advising its members to accept the offer on Monday and they'll vote on it next week. C. Payne says they will continue to plan for a possible second strike scheduled for July the 12th in the meantime. The father of chosen Koreheke has told the court he struggles with his grief every day. Jason Koreheke was speaking at the sentencing of Turiaranga Tai, who murdered Ms Koreheke last year following weeks of attacks. Mr Koreheke told the court Tai had beaten the courage out of his daughter, who was too afraid to talk about her abuse. The acting Prime Minister says there will be a full investigation into the appointment of Wally Haumaha as the new Deputy Police Commissioner this month. Mr Haumaha is being criticised over comments he made during a 2004 investigation supporting the police officers accused of raping Louise Nicholas in the 1980s. Winston Peters says he's not sure if the government was aware of Mr Haumaha's remarks when he was offered the role. Hastings teenager Rosie Lewis pleaded guilty to murder and aggravated robbery of a man she met on the dating app Tinder. She appeared at the High Court in Napier today and will be sentenced next month. Lewis and Shauna Karauria robbed and murdered Sandeep Deman in December last year. Last month, Karauria was jailed for life with a minimum non-parole period of 12 years. Kiwifruit growers in the Bay of Plenty who took the government to court over the vine-killing disease PSA are ecstatic that they've won. The High Court has ruled the forerunner of the Ministry for Primary Industries breached a duty of care to the growers. Justice Mallon found the then Ministry of Agriculture and Forestry did not properly monitor the importation of pollen from China in 2009. She said the risks should have been obvious, but the ministry didn't exercise reasonable care. Those are the headlines.
Thank you very much indeed, Anna Thomas. It's 10 to Business News now with Matt Chatterton, who is joining us from Wellington. Hi, Matt. Consumers and employees are feeling confident about the future. This country just runs on surveys, isn't it? And Tuesday, people are confident. Wednesday, they're not. Thursday, confident. Friday, not. Consumers and employees, what's up?
Yeah, well, if you believe all these surveys, it's just so many of them. Which one do you choose, to be honest?
No idea, Matty. We'll choose the one you're reporting on tonight, bro.
All right. Well, employment confidence is at its highest level in a decade. with workers more confident of holding on to their jobs. That's come from Westpac. Their employment confidence survey has risen 1.5 points to 117.4 for the June quarter. Those numbers will obviously mean you'll know what they're talking about there, John. That's the highest level since 2008. That's pre the global financial crisis. However, confidence in finding a new job or getting an increase in your wages in the next year is down, which Westpac says is a sign of a cooling labour market. Meanwhile, the ANZ Roy Morgan monthly consumer confidence survey has dipped a shade, but it still remains positive. Consumers remain reasonably upbeat about the current climate, but feeling less so about the economic outlook. Of the survey's 1,000 respondents, 7% expected good times financially in the next 12 months, but that is down from 12% in May, and it is the lowest since August 2016. And consumers' perceptions of their current financial situation has dropped 2 points, with 11% of those surveyed reporting they are feeling financially better off than a year ago.
Matt, for people watching, there's a large green ball moving around behind your right shoulder. It seemed to be levitating. It's stationary now. But
look at that! Yeah,
it seemed to be levitating before.
That's the World Watch desk. I don't know what they're up to in that department. I tell you,
quite extraordinary. It was an added bonus for viewers. IAG is abolishing sales incentives for staff.
Yeah.
Matt, what's that about?
Yeah, so this decision follows a Financial Markets Authority investigation into the life insurance industry, which did find that incentives often resulted in consumers taking out policies which actually weren't best suited to them. IAG New Zealand has 1.8 million customers here, with brands such as AMI, State, NZI and Lumley Insurance. It says it will have no incentivised sales targets, which means staff will be solely focused on offering consumers the right cover and protection.
Yeah, I guess you can make a compelling case for that, can't you? Right, what happened on the markets today, Matty?
Well, I tell you, the top 50 index closed down 55 points to 8,943. That's a 0.6% drop. And the New Zealand dollar is up to 67.8 US cents. That's not a massive movement, to be honest, and it is down slightly to 91.7 Australian cents.
Matt Chatterton joining us from Wellington. Thanks very much indeed. Last night we led Checkpoint with the Farm Watch organisation, strongly criticising the Ministry for Primary Industries for being, and I quote, incompetent when it comes to animal welfare issues. MPI wouldn't front on Checkpoint last night, but they did this morning on Morning Report and hit back strongly, saying prosecutions rely on witnesses and many people who blow the whistle to Farm Watch and SAFE won't appear in court. Then SAFE hit back, essentially repeating Farm Watch's claims that MPI doesn't adequately respond to claims of animal abuse on our farms. All of this, of course, follows the release of footage to the Newsroom website showing a share milker beating his cows, including with a steel pipe. The Agriculture Minister, Damien O'Connor, is currently in Australia, but we spoke to him earlier this afternoon.
Look, it's a big job, and the system's been through a number of changes, as has MPI. There are claims that we're not well equipped. We work with the RSPCA to make sure that we are out there on the ground, checking on people and following up on notifications. But there are not enough people, of course, to keep an eye on everyone across New Zealand. 22
animal welfare inspectors, right? MPI has.
Yeah, and that's clearly not sufficient. We are working to boost that number, but we work with other agencies. We are relying on people, as we do with biosecurity as well, that we have to rely on other New Zealanders and people to identify where faults and failings are occurring, and we follow up on that.
Absolutely, but if animal welfare is an issue this country and this government takes seriously, you are not suggesting, are you, that 22 animal welfare officers working for the ministry that handles agriculture in New Zealand is sufficient?
No, and I think, look, we've taken over a very big organisation with multiple responsibilities, and we're working through a process of breaking down into business units. We've done that in biosecurity and food safety. I know the Minister's held a hui, holding discussions with stakeholders across all the areas of animal welfare, and I'm sure that she'll be putting forward a bid to get more resources and have more people on the ground. That's a process we're working through to make sure that when we spend the money and increase the number of people and upgrade the system, that we do it in a really effective way.
Okay, so what we have there, I think, is an acknowledgement that there is an inadequacy of resource. What about the resource that you currently have? Are they proactive enough? In other words, do they try hard enough to prosecute when they are presented with evidence or testimony of animal abuse?
Look, I think they do, but of course they get a number of complaints and they follow up on them all, and some of them, they have to make assessments on where they put the resource to follow through on a prosecution. And obviously legal situations are complex. They've taken a long time to prosecute farmers. They have done so. They did so down in my region, in fact, in Nelson more recently. So, those are quite complex, challenging situations. As I say, they're not often on the ground watching and witnessing, the abuse themselves, so they have to work on, evidence. We've got, thousands of people with animals, tens and hundreds of thousands of people with animals in the cities, out in the country. We can't keep an eye on all of them all the time.
Right, so what's going to change? If you and I talk again in 6 months' time, what will be different? What can you do better? What are you going to do better?
Well, the reality is that we will not be able to be out on every single farm all the time. I can tell you that I have been telling, just the other day, Federated Farmers meeting, that we are governed, our reputation is governed by the lowest common denominator. And so if there is a farmer down the back of some valley that's not looking after their animals, then the farmers, their neighbours, have to put up their hand and say, look, we've got to step in here, we've got to intervene. We've not done that all the time, and so neighbours, it's not just for the purposes of keeping our reputation, but to look after the animals, to actually help the farmer, because clearly someone who's doing that needs help. And so we've got to look over the fence. We've got to look over, into the neighbour's situation and help them, and then identify and actually alert officials and MPI if there's something going wrong.
What did you think when you saw that footage?
I was horrified, and clearly, anyone who does that's, not right, they're under huge pressure. I'm not making excuses, but no sane person does that, particularly when, as a farmer, you're reliant on the animals, to produce for you, to work for you. And, it's a symbiotic relationship on a farm between the animals and the farmer. And the vast majority of farmers, 99.9% of them understand that and take great care of their animals. But as I said before, we are governed in terms of our international reputation, in terms of media scrutiny, by the lowest common denominator. We shouldn't condemn, the 99.9% of farmers because there are some rogues and some people who, for whatever reason, do these outrageous things.
They were outrageous things, and there was a farmhand who saw them, who was so distressed about them that in the first instance he went to Farm Watch. Farm Watch said, hey, we can't handle this. You must go to MPI. The farmhand went to MPI. MPI visited the farm and found inadequate evidence to proceed with their investigation. Is that good enough?
No, and I'll be seeking advice, and I'm sure Minister Whakari has asked for that already, as to where are the gaps in the law that prevent them stepping in. And, we have changed the animal welfare legislation, not so long ago, so we'll just have to keep upgrading it so that where we find fault in the legislation that might prevent intervention by MPI or any other, animal welfare organisation, that we change it to give good effect to what we want, and that is the highest standards of animal welfare in the world to maintain our reputation.
Damien O'Connor speaking to us on his cell phone from Brisbane. Forgive the line being a bit dodgy, but we thought it was worth hearing all of that, and we will return and see what changes have been made. More than 7 years after the major Christchurch earthquakes, many claims are now settled. Some drag on, and some arise anew from the paperwork of EQC. The latter are often unsolds. These are homes sold since the earthquakes and bought by people who trusted the EQC paperwork, saying they'd been scoped, assessed and repaired and were safe and sound. When they're not, when the assessment missed major damage or the repairs weren't good enough, a nightmare can begin. The total number of unsolds now sits at 685 that we know about. And when they're above cap, the newer homeowners have little or no recourse. EQC refers them to private insurers. Private insurers say, hey, this ain't us, this is EQC's fault. So many are now resorting to court. Andrew Hooker at Shine Lawyers is taking on more than a dozen cases. It's expensive. And even if they win, the homeowners have to forego 20% of any payout. Zach Fleming and cameraman Nick Monroe went to visit a group of claimants at Shine Lawyers in Christchurch. Here are 9 of their stories.
We bought the house thinking that it had all been repaired from EQC, and it ended up being 166 mils out at the lowest point.
And we've since discovered cracks in foundations, cracks and external and internal walls.
My biggest asset is now zilch. I've got nothing left.
I just want my house fixed. I just want it so I can actually continue with my life.
We want them to pay out what they owe us. We're not even asking for anything that's unfair.
I've just about cried a number of times on the phone trying to deal with this stuff.
And all of this is EQC's fault. If it weren't for EQC and their negligence, I wouldn't be in the position that I'm in today.
In the end, we had to go to the lawyers because we just can't see a way through this.
9 people, 1 story. They're known as the onsolds, and they've had enough.
You're just not treated like a person at all. It's heartbreaking.
They bought houses that had been ticked off by EQC as fully repaired.
My name's Jamie, and I've been dealing with EQC for the last 3 years now. I bought a house in North New Brighton 3 years ago, thinking that all EQC repairs had been completed on that house.
All 9 are in essentially the same position as Jamie. The work was ticked off, but was either botched or sometimes not done at all. Their insurers won't pay because it's not their fault, and EQC will only pay up to the standard $100,000 cap.
Naively, we thought that because it had been apparently fixed and signed off, that it was actually fixed correctly. Everyone's wiping their hands of it. EQC have said it's only our responsibility up to 100K, and the insurance company doesn't want to know, and we're stuck with this house that's not worth what we paid for it, that's not worth the mortgage we have on it.
We're pretty much left with it as is, whereas house sitting at the moment paying a full mortgage for a damaged house, and no one wants to put their hands up and pay for it.
They've cash settled us approximately $60,000 now and pushed us over cap, but our insurance company has actually said that they're not going to take it on. So it's shoddy workmanship and EQC's problem to fix.
We have to take off the roof, we have to remove the doors and windows, we have to replace the whole of the place. Means we'd have to go through a complete new rebuild. Means that my husband and I, who were looking to redo our house and redevelop it and double glaze and all those sort of things, can't do a thing. We're sitting in limbo and waiting.
Paint on the windowsills are peeling off, the house is cold, it's damp, we can't do anything to it until it's been assessed properly, so just waiting to see what the outcome is, which isn't ideal for winter and living conditions, which makes it pretty crappy for your first house.
I came here in 2012, I'm a drain layer and I've dug holes, I've worked in shit, I've broken my ass, and I'm
They didn't have qualified people doing the scopes in the first place. They didn't check up on the work that they were paying for to check to see if it had ever been done properly.
We've spent our own money to fight an organisation that is trying to get out of doing what it should have done the first time. And despite us having everything in black and white, they still persist with saying, no, we're right.
Options exhausted, they're taking EQC to court, claiming negligence because they've had years of
meeting after meeting after meeting with EQC. We've followed all their processes, and we've been treated like mushrooms, fed shit and kept in the dark. There's no common sense, there's no accountability, there's no honesty from them. They've got no empathy, they've got no understanding that it's about dollars and cents for them. It's not about right or wrong. It's not about putting things right, it's just they don't care.
Oh, I don't have any dealings with EQC at the moment. It stressed me out so much last year. I was in tears on a daily basis, just trying to deal with them, trying to get to the bottom of what was going on. It took them 18 months to tell me it was over cap and sign me off the books and give me a small cheque and say, fix it yourself. I don't have the mental or the emotional time to worry about it every day. I want to carry on with my life.
It's draining. The last 5 years has been draining. It's a full-time job dealing with EQC and then raising a family and working full-time as well. It's exhausting.
You know, 2 young kids, and I work full-time and my wife works full-time as well. You know, struggling to pay the mortgage off, let alone trying to deal with all this other stuff and that, you know, just want to move on from it, yeah. But yeah, who's going to put their hand up for EQC? Well, I mean, they should be liable for it because, I mean, they didn't do the scope of works properly in the first place. How can a $50,000 scope of works turn into a $300,000 scope of works? I mean, it just shows you right there that they didn't do their job properly, you know.
The last 18 months has been hell, I guess, they just keep sort of fobbing you off, trying to, I guess, get you to go away. So you structural engineers report and you send that to them and try and get them to see logic. It's a challenging process, not always contactable. You're dealing with 3 or 4 different people that keep passing the buck. Oh, so-and-so never told me that. Oh, this is a new guy, John, that you're dealing with now, and you're just constantly getting put around a circle, just either stalling time or just trying to avoid it or hope you go away.
And slowly but surely, years of that has completely eroded their faith in the system.
We need to take EQC to court and actually prove that they haven't done their job properly and that they are accountable.
We thought we could trust EQC, we thought we could trust the fact that the scope of works was signed off and that the money was paid. And at the moment we're sitting there going, well, our house, which was worth a lot of money, is now worth absolutely zilch. We can only sell it as an as-is, where-is build. So, yeah, who can you trust if you can't trust the government and the EQC that are supposed to be looking after us?
I asked some of the onsolds if they have a message for EQC CEO Sid Miller.
Do I have to be polite?
No, I want you to be honest.
Do your job properly. This house was fixed by EQC, a government department, and you guys mucked it up twice and then decided that it was my problem. If you had fixed it the first time, I wouldn't be here today.
Willie Matthewson was a bit blunter.
Jerry Branning's a he's a yeah. I know you can't.
He came to Christchurch in 2012 with his wife Kim to help with the rebuild. Now, after 6 years fighting EQC, they just want to leave.
We desperately want to get out of Christchurch. We came here for the rebuild, and Christchurch has left a bitter taste in our mouth. I've got 3 grandsons right now, under the age of 3, that live in another town that I can't get to because I'm stuck in this shitty house that we cannot get repaired correctly.
We're not after money. We're not after anything we're not entitled to. We're only after what we're entitled to. We just want our house repaired to a standard that we can sell it and go back to Hawke's Bay where we come from. We came here to help with the rebuild and rebuild our lives and go home. We've got grandchildren in the North Island that we are desperate to see, but until we sell this house, we can't go. I've had 2 mortgages now since 2012. I'm 62 years old. It's time for me to go home. It's You know, we want to go home, don't we? Yeah, I'm going to get upset.
For Checkpoint, Zach Fleming.
9 people with the experience of having bought what's called onsolts in Christchurch. 6.5 to 6, you're with Checkpoint on RNZ. We go now to Hawke's Bay, where a Hastings teenager has pleaded guilty to the murder of a man she met on the dating app Tinder. 17-year-old Rosie Lewis appeared in the High Court in Napier this morning, where she admitted to murdering Sandeep Demon. Another Napier 17-year-old Sean Karoria has already been jailed. Karoria has already been jailed for his part in the murder, jailed for life earlier. The crime was planned, the intention to steal Mr Demon's car. The 30-year-old victim was in New Zealand on a study visa. Our reporter Annika Smith was in court and heard what Rosie Lewis, working with Sean Karoria, had done.
Yes, John. So Mr Demon was a 30-year-old Indian national who had moved to New Zealand in late 2016. He lived alone in Napier at the time of his death, and sometime during last year he matched with Lewis on a dating app Tinder. He bought her a cell phone on the 16th of December, and it is understood that they met several times in person before the fatal encounter.
Right, what exactly happened during that encounter?
So according to the summary of facts, Lewis and Karoria had hatched a plan to kill another Indian male beforehand, but on the night of Demon's murder, it was in fact him who was convinced to drive out to Tutita with Lewis, Karoria and another male. Now, the defendants exchanged harrowing text messages on that journey, one of which, in one, Karoria said to Lewis that he would stop for a toilet break at the Mataharua Gorge, and he would grab Demon out of the car, stab him and throw him off a cliff. That wasn't where they ended up. They actually ended up on Mataharua Road, a quiet stretch populated by dairy farms. Now, it was here that Karoria attacked Mr Demon with a butcher knife. He stabbed him 9 times and also stomped on his head to ensure he was dead. When the group started to drive off in Mr Demon's car, Lewis said she thought she saw his body move, and so Karoria actually reversed the car and then continued the assault. The following day, Karoria listed Demon's car on a local Facebook page for sale, and it was around the same time that Mr Demon's body was found.
Right, you say she'd been speaking to another Indian national, another Indian male. Was that male the prime target?
Yes, he was. The same day that Mr Demon was taken out to Tutita, Lewis had actually texted this other male asking if he wanted a girlfriend. She went on to ask to be picked up by this male, but this male made excuses thinking she was only interested in his car. And it was just 1 hour later after this conversation took place that she made fatal contact with Mr Demon.
Goodness, Annika, what a case. What was the reaction in court today?
Well, it was a brief hearing in the High Court at Napier this morning. There were several supporters for Lewis in the public gallery. She pleaded guilty to the charge of aggravated robbery first. But when the second charge of murder was read out, she actually paused. She glanced at her lawyer, Matthew Phelps, before he turned around, nodded to her, and then she said guilty. A mother that a woman in the public gallery who I understand to be her mother wept silently as the pleas were entered, and Justice Rebecca Ellis remanded Lewis in custody for sentencing on July 27.
Annika Smith from Hawke's Bay earlier today. Just looking now at the South Island traffic advisory that we get in every night from the good people in Christchurch. Stephen Mann and his team do a tremendous job of updating us on the roads, and I'm seeing an enormous amount of the use of the word caution, ice, ice likely, black ice, snow and ice, caution urged, and really Otago, Kurau, Omarama, Twizel, Luggett. and along the west coast, Arthur's Pass, Otira. Really, if you are driving through there overnight and well into tomorrow morning, Anna Thomas, welcome to the studio. Please feel free to walk behind me. Do take care. Quite strong advisory from the people who do traffic in the South Island. Lots of ice warnings, lots of caution. Please do drive carefully if you are out and about in that part of the world. And feedback, a lot of it about MPI and their ability to look after animal welfare on the farms. Damien O'Connor said 99.9% of farmers don't treat animals badly. Quite a few people picking him up on that. One person, Colin from Wellington, saying, gosh, those 25 sadistic farmers who are part of the 0.1% really do a lot of damage. Farm Watch said to us, actually, it was a long interview and we didn't run this yesterday, that they are not persuaded that low levels of animal cruelty aren't in fact a greater part of New Zealand farming life than we all realise. We'd love to hear from farmers about that. That is something we're going to investigate at a later stage. And lots of people, including nurses themselves, saying they are a little bit surprised that the nurses organisation has called off the industrial action without nurses knowing what the new offer is. We're hearing from quite a few nurses. I'm astounded that the nurses' strike has been called off before they put the new proposal to members. There is little confidence by nurses in the NZ Nurses Organisation to represent them fairly, and confidence that this new deal is other than laying the cards out in a different way. Remembering that the NZNO put the original deal to members, they are so far out of touch. We're going to cover this at length on Friday. We will learn the terms, on Monday. Learn the terms of the deal on Monday afternoon at 2 o'clock, and see Payne from the New Zealand Nurses Organisation will join us on Checkpoint. It's Friday night now, though, and it's time for the Pips.
RNZ News at 6 o'clock. Good evening, I'm Anna Thomas. The Nurses Union has called off a 24-hour strike planned for next Thursday after District Health Boards made a new pay offer. Thousands of nurses had been planning to walk off the wards following months of failed talks about pay and working conditions. Nita Blake-Person reports.
The Employment Relations Authority has been facilitating talks with the union and DHBs over the past 2 days after months of failed negotiations. The nurses' organisation says it will be recommending the improved offer to its members on Monday. DHBs have previously offered a package worth $520 million, which includes pay increases of between 9 and 15% and a 2% increase in nursing numbers. The union says the strike next Thursday has been called off while the nurses vote on the new offer. But it says the notice for the second strike on July the 12th remains in place and contingency planning for that will continue. Cornita Blake-Person, TNA.
A judge says he didn't use the 3 strikes law against the killer of chosen Koreheke because there's a glimmer of hope he can change. Turia Rangita was today sentenced to life in prison with a minimum non-parole period of 17 years for shooting his girlfriend at point-blank range as she hid in a cupboard. The 23-year-old qualified for the maximum sentence of life without parole under the 3 strikes law because of previous seriously violent offences. Justice Muir said he was torn about whether to impose the sentence, but decided the 55 years Tai would likely spend in prison would be manifestly unjust despite his high risk of reoffending.
Although it may take something of a personal epiphany, of which there are few present signs, for that risk adequately to abate, I am not prepared to dismiss any prospect of rehabilitation and to say effectively that this man is beyond redemption.
Justice Muir. European Union leaders have reached an agreement on migration policy after 10 hours of talks at a summit in Brussels. Under the deal, financing will be increased to help Turkey and North African states further restrict migration to Europe. And Italy and Greece, where most of the migrants arrive after travelling across the Mediterranean Sea, will be able to set up processing centres if they wish. Emerging from the talks, the British Prime Minister Theresa May welcomed the new policy.
We've come to positive conclusions, a lot of them around what the United Kingdom has been encouraging for some time, which is taking more action upstream in countries of origin, so that we can ensure that people aren't having to make and aren't making these very dangerous journeys, often travelling many miles, often at the hands of the people smugglers, and making the dangerous trips across the Mediterranean, where we still see some people dying.
And the Italian Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte also says he is satisfied with the deal. The minister responsible for animal welfare says the government needs to employ more welfare officers. The Green Party is urging its coalition partners to improve how the Ministry of Primary Industry deals with complaints after footage released by a lobby group showed a share milker hitting cows with a metal pole. The Associate Agriculture Minister, Mika Faitiri, says the ministry currently has 22 animal welfare officers throughout the country.
I'm waiting for the outcome of the investigation that's currently happening up north, and I'm entering into discussions with my officials to see what the optimum number is. Clearly 22 isn't enough.
Mika Faitiri says changes to improve upholding welfare standards will be looked at through the new animal welfare framework. There have been long queues at petrol stations across Auckland as people rush to fill up ahead of a regional fuel tax going into effect on Sunday of 11.5 cents a litre. At the mobile station in Sandringham, where unleaded 91 was at $1.99, there were queues of about 7 cars waiting to fill up this afternoon. One of them, Leilani Tamu, says she supports new fuel taxes if they improve public transport, but she's worried that it will take time.
2 days ago, I caught the train and the bus, and then I ended up being 20 minutes late to pick up my son from daycare, and I had to call up someone, like a relative, to pick up my son. And it's because the bus didn't turn up. So it's just that kind of like, oh gosh, as long as the system works, it's fine.
Leilani Tamu. The police in Christchurch are searching for a man in connection with a violent assault in New Brighton last night. A 22-year-old man was stabbed in the neck with a knife and is in hospital in a serious but stable condition. The police say the attack occurred in the car park on Marine Parade at 10:30. The offender is believed to be 20 to 35 years old, of slight build, with fair skin and wearing a black hoodie, and he was driving a gold or bronze-coloured Nissan car. It's 6:05. The President of New Zealand Football says the board played no role in the shock resignation of Chief Executive Andy Martin. Effective immediately, Martin's decision to quit was confirmed this afternoon. It comes just 10 days after the national body confirmed that 13 football firms had made official complaints about coach Andreas Haraf. Martin has opted not to make himself available to media today for comment, but President Derek Shaw did front on the news and says there was no pressure from the board for Martin to step down.
It's his decision, and we respect his decision. As any employee of any organisation, he has, rights and responsibilities, and we certainly respect those. And he's made that decision.
New Zealand Football President Derek Shaw. The departing Blues flanker Jerome Kaino says he's excited by the abundance of talent the All Blacks are developing in his position. Kaino will play his final game at Eden Park when the Blues host the Queensland Reds tonight before heading to take up a contract with French club Toulouse. A veteran of 81 tests, the 35-year-old says missing out on selection for this month's series against France was an interesting but eventually enjoyable experience.
Around selection time, it was a little bit weird, but just to sit back and watch as a spectator, I didn't really think of it as a competitive missing out. I just thought of it as a spectator, and I really enjoyed it. The excitement that I had was just seeing the next crop of guys in my position and how many freaks there are that are going to be in that jersey for a long time.
Jerome Kaino. And that's the news.
Tomorrow morning, outgoing Government Chief Science Advisor Sir Peter Gluckman on whether his advice was taken. Leslie Jamieson has written an unusually fascinating story of her alcoholism and recovery. She says everyone has a story, but it's how you tell it that matters. And I try to get Jermaine Clement to answer a few simple questions. Join me, Kim Hill, tomorrow morning from 8 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow from Northland to Waikato, also Coromandel, Bay of Plenty, Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa. Mostly fine, however isolated showers about the coast from Gisborne to Wairarapa, clearing early tomorrow morning. The remainder of the North Island fine with cloudy periods and isolated showers developing tomorrow morning. Bulla, Westland, Fiordland, a few showers spreading further north tomorrow and turning to rain in Fiordland tomorrow night. Nelson, Marlborough, Canterbury and Otago, excluding Clutha, Mainly fine, but isolated showers about Dunedin early tomorrow. Clutha and Southland, partly cloudy with a few showers, mainly about the coast, possibly heavy but becoming fine tomorrow. And for the Chatham Islands, often cloudy with showers. RNZ National, it's 6:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint with John Campbell.
Thank you very much indeed, Anna Thomas. Have a fantastic weekend.
You too.
Are you back next week?
I'm back on Monday.
Right. I
Yes,
look forward to
indeed.
seeing you. The Green Party is urging their coalition partners in government to reconsider the Ministry for Primary Industries' responsibilities and capabilities around animal welfare. Gosh, we've talked about this a lot over the last couple of nights. Farm Watch released footage, of course, to the newsroom website of a share milker repeatedly beating cows. And an MPI investigation is now underway, having not been underway, despite MPI having visited the farm before the footage was released. The Green Party says more needs to be done to protect farm animals. Charlie Drever reports on this.
It was a video which shocked many New Zealanders, a Northland share milker beating cows in the milk shed with a steel pole, leaving them scared and their legs swollen. Multiple complaints were made to MPI about the abuse, but it wasn't until Farm Watch installed hidden cameras and then released the footage the true extent of what was happening came to light. MPI says investigators have spoken to the worker concerned and have also spoken with the farm owner. But Green Party's animal welfare spokesperson Gareth Hughes says MPI isn't doing enough to stop animal abuse.
The fact that he was subject of multiple complaints before this footage came out is worrying. We need MPI to really step up and protect our animals. Look, a 30-minute chat with the farmer and finding out he's a nice guy isn't good enough. They need to be much more proactive in terms of visiting these farms and inspecting the welfare conditions of the animals.
Currently, MPI is not legally able to install hidden cameras where they suspect animal abuse or neglect is taking place. Gareth Hughes is urging the government to look into changing the laws to allow the installation of cameras in milking sheds and slaughterhouses.
We're doing it on fishing boats. It's happening in Israel, in France, the United Kingdom. We, every year, tragically see these issues of abuses come out into the media, and tragically it's only when activists bring the information forward. So I think it's something the government should consider.
Mr Hughes says the Green Party also supported the separation of animal welfare roles and agriculture promotion. He added a lack of animal welfare officers didn't help. The minister responsible for animal welfare, Labour's Meka Whaitiri, says she knows the number of officers is a problem.
So we've got 22 at the moment, spread right throughout the country. Of course, we've got more animals than the number. So again, I'm waiting for the outcome of the investigation that's currently happening up north, and I'm entering into discussions with my officials to see what the optimum number is. Clearly 22 isn't enough.
However, Meka Whaitiri was against installing cameras. Acting Prime Minister Winston Peters is backing MPI's capabilities. He says the role of agriculture and animal welfare should all remain with MPI.
MPI has brought countless cases against cruelty to animals, and if they're left to do the job properly and properly funded, they'll go on doing it. So I'm not going to go down the pathway of someone who says, I've got no evidence to suggest this, but I suggest they're not doing the job properly. Do they know how many cases that these people have inquired into? No. Well, it's far more than people think.
Winston Peters says cameras were also not an option.
The mass majority of farmers in this country are exceptionally conscientious of the issues of animal cruelty. They're opposed to it. They'd attest that there may be some in their industries who are doing that, and so they should not have to go to all the cost because of a few reprobates or renegades where this matter is concerned.
However, under the new animal welfare framework released yesterday, Minister Whaitiri said the government will be looking at the possibility of introducing an independent voice on animal welfare and hiring extra officers. But what the exact changes will be and when they will take place is not yet known, with the minister first awaiting the outcome of the MPI investigation. For Checkpoint, Charlie Drever.
12 minutes past 6. How important is it that heads of government agencies front up to media and the public over matters directly affecting New Zealanders' public interest? Documents obtained by RNZ show the head of Housing New Zealand did one-on-one interviews with media just twice in his 20 months in the job before he was finally forced to front across the board over the meth contamination issue. Andrew Mackenzie's accountability was questioned after the government's chief scientist revealed meth testing levels used by Housing New Zealand to chuck tenants out were fundamentally flawed. As our political reporter Gia Garrick has found, there's many who think, well, fronting that really on such a public issue is not good enough.
It took the head of Housing New Zealand 8 days to front to media over a report by Sir Peter Gluckman, the Chief Science Advisor, which debunked the notion that passive exposure to meth could be harmful. When Andrew Mackenzie finally did front, he said he was sorry.
We certainly apologise to all those people who've had their lives disrupted as we've shifted them out of their homes and, you know, and in some cases, many cases, moved them into other houses and of our houses. In other cases, they haven't been moved into our houses and they've had to find alternative accommodation.
And you accept that they have been...
But it took 8 days of this.
Housing New Zealand's Chief Executive, Andrew Mackenzie, who earns $46,000 a month, refused to be interviewed again today. He's never given RNZ an interview on his agency's meth testing policy, and his communications manager says he never will.
And this.
Yes, and we really do think that Housing New Zealand should front for an interview on this. Benedict asked, we asked, the response has been no across the board. We will keep asking.
Opposition housing spokesperson Judith Collins says 8 days is too long, and she would have made that known to Mr Mackenzie.
I would have been critical of the Chief Executive's lack of fronting. I don't know whether or not the Minister told the Chief Executive not to front, and I think that needs to be considered and asked, but frankly, the best thing to do is to get straight out there when there's any issue, because if you don't, it only gets worse.
Ms Collins says ability to front the media should be a prerequisite for the job.
Whoever it is must be able to front the media. And if you look at some very highly successful chief executives, Ray Smith from Corrections, Ray was always able to front on issues. And when you've got highly contentious issues going on, if you don't have that, then as a minister, it's difficult if you can't rely on your chief executive to be able to front as well as yourself.
Andrew Mackenzie is paid nearly $500,000 to do his job, and when members of the public were asked if that meant he should front, most said absolutely.
You've got an obligation to. I mean, that's what you've been paid for.
To be honest with you, for that amount of money, yeah, you should be putting more out there and letting people know what's going on with the social housing crisis, etc.
If you're chief executive, you should be able to confront people and actually publicly announce the stuff you're doing, the actions you're taking, and all that matter.
I'm glad he spoke it to the media after the pressure was put on him. Yeah. No, something as serious as that he should be fronting.
Although some people thought he'd surely have other staff to do the fronting for him. The acting Prime Minister Winston Peters agreed with the latter without missing an opportunity to take a swipe at the media.
Well, is there a Minister of Housing? Yes, there is. He's done probably about 3 every day. I'd rather the man be effective on getting his job done rather than run around, as delightful as it is to speak to you.
The Housing Minister Phil Twyford wouldn't comment other than to say he has confidence Andrew Mackenzie is doing his job but should front media from time to time. Housing New Zealand pointed to timeliness and a manager's availability as factors in determining who would front for an interview. RNZ also asked the agency if Mr Mackenzie wanted to have a chat about today's story, but we never heard back. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Gia Garrick.
Coming up, we're going to look at the Cathedral in Christchurch, but just before that, Auckland motorists have been rushing to fill up ahead of the fuel tax that comes into effect on Sunday. From Sunday, they'll pay an 11.5 cent increase. That's a regional fuel tax per litre, which will be used to improve local roads. And there's more to come. In October, that will rise to 15 cents a litre as the government introduces a nationwide fuel excise of 3.5 cents. And 2 similar rises in 2019 and 2020. In short, petrol is becoming more expensive. Sophia Duckor-Jones has been out at petrol stations around Auckland talking to people filling up.
At the Gull petrol station in Waverly in South Auckland, cars queued to fill up. At $1.93 a litre for unleaded 91, people had travelled across town to fill their tanks before Sunday's price hike. Ben from Otara says it will be tough for struggling families.
It definitely makes things a lot harder for people, I guess, who are working minimum wage jobs that do own vehicles, especially those who live in low socioeconomic communities. A lot of us tend to come to places like this, come outside of our own community just to get petrol.
The queue was just as long at the mobile station in Sandringham, where unleaded 91 cost $1.99. Leilani Tamu and her husband had driven to several petrol stations before deciding to fill up here. She supports the tax hikes if they result in a reliable public transport system, but says she's worried that will take time.
2 days ago, I caught the train and the bus, and then I ended up being 20 minutes late to pick up my son from daycare, and I had to call up someone, like a relative, to pick up my son. And it's because the bus didn't turn up. So it's just that kind of like, oh gosh, as long as the system works, it's fine.
Another motorist, Susie Pannell, says higher fuel costs will also mean higher prices across the board.
I just really find it hard because it's not just fuel's going to go up, everything is going to go up. Cost of living is going to go up on Sunday because you've increased the price of fuel. The price of bread is going to go up, the price of milk is going to go up, the price of cheese is going to go up, the price of shoes are going to go up, everything's going to go up on Sunday.
Freight operators are warning customers they'll have to raise their charges. Tom Compton owns CV Compton, which delivers building products. He says he has no choice but to pass it on.
Ultimately, our customer is paying more, and it's up to them whether they want to absorb it or charge or put their prices up. We will definitely be receiving more for our bit, that's for sure.
Tom Compton says while the fuel tax will raise prices, he supports anything that will lead to better roads and lower congestion. For Checkpoint, Sophia Rako-Jones.
19 minutes past 6. It might only be, sorry, I'm going to start that again. It might only be weeks before some work on the quake-damaged Christchurch Cathedral site finally begins. Finally is often used in intros, really deserved to be used there. The cathedral has sat desolate since the 2011 earthquake, and the Anglican Church and the heritage groups have waged war over its future ever since. That all came to an end last September when the Synod voted to restore it at a cost of more than $100 million. And today the government announced the company that would be responsible for doing that work is almost ready, almost and finally. But some Christchurch locals think this has taken way too long. Logan Church reports.
Under the glare of the crumbling Christchurch Cathedral, the Greater Christchurch Regeneration Minister, Megan Woods, announced the joint venture charged with rebuilding it is almost ready to go.
But I think one of the things that the people of Christchurch are looking forward to is starting to see momentum around that building. There'll be a generation of children who will grow up watching a cathedral being built in their square, and that will be quite something special for them.
It's expected to cost $104 million to reinstate the cathedral. This includes grants and loans from the government and the Christchurch City Council, as well as the church's $42 million insurance proceeds. Church property trustees and the Christchurch Cathedral Reinstatement Trust have been locked in negotiations for months to try and hammer out how their joint venture will work. Both parties have now come to an agreement, and today the joint venture's new boss, former investments banker Justin Murray, says he hopes clearing work can begin next month.
The early works will be around site preparation, and as you can imagine, it's not a small project, but we certainly want to get underway with that quickly, and that'll be in the next few weeks.
But Justin Murray says there is still a lot of work to do before work on the main building can begin.
I don't think that there will be stonemasons on site for many months, because you can imagine that preparation work actually needs to be done first, and we need to ensure that in a project of this magnitude that we don't rush in to doing something before we are thoroughly prepared for it.
The government also hopes today's announcements will get people interested in raising money for the restoration. The Great Christchurch Building Trust had previously pledged to fundraise $13.5 million. The Trust's co-chair, Philip Burden, says he's confident it can exceed that.
We have no doubt we can raise the $13.5 million we talked about, but hopefully we can raise usefully more. It's going to happen, and we're delighted to, of course, provide whatever assistance we can.
But not everyone is happy with the pace of all this work. Christchurch locals in Cathedral Square today said it's taken way too long to restore what's been dubbed a bomb site.
They keep spending all this time getting groups together to make a decision, and it's almost like the group to make the decision is making another group to make another, and it just seems to be no one's actually making the main decision to get something done, and then once it is decided, it just takes forever.
I suppose I'll just watch and hold my breath and watch this space.
Yeah, you might be holding your breath for a wee while, do you think so?
I might run out of breath. Yeah. So, no, it's a sorry state of affairs there now, isn't it?
Well, it's just dragged on, and there's been a lot of talking and incredible lack of action. Amazing. I'd like to see some progress being made, doing some work.
The final sign-off on the joint venture is expected in the coming weeks. But don't hold your breath for the cathedral to be finished anytime soon. Megan Woods says it could take up to 10 years. In Christchurch for Checkpoint, Logan Church Channel.
A tiny town in South Taranaki is still coming to terms with losing 4 of its residents in a horror crash just north of the town. The Mayor of South Taranaki has been in Waverly today to offer support to locals. Waverly residents Ian and Rosalie Porteous, Aura Keane and Brenda Williams were killed in the crash on Wednesday. It also took the lives of 8-year-old Nivek Madams, baby Shady Thompson and her father, Jeremy Thompson. Laura Dooney's been in Waverly today, where residents are still very much, of course, in shock.
At the scene of the crash today stand bright flowers left behind by loved ones, a multicoloured plastic windmill and a soft toy. At the bowling club, where all 4 elderly occupants of one car were members, the flag's at half-mast. Yesterday a race meeting went on, but all the jockeys wore black armbands as a sign of respect to the 7 people killed. In a town where the front door's almost always open, the loss of 4 active members of the community is sorely felt. South Taranaki Mayor Ross Dunlop says when he visited today to offer comfort, he noticed a sombre mood.
Well, the first thing that we noticed is actually people are driving more carefully. As we were coming down from Patea to Waverly, it was noticeable that people were just being a little bit more careful and cautious, and also people are just pretty subdued and really being respectful of the situation that this community is in at the moment.
Mr Dunlop has been talking to the affected families and says the community is doing what it can to help them out.
The community is very much rallying around, and also the offers that I've had of support is just incredible, really. I mean, and that if there is any good that comes out of these sort of events, it is, this wonderful spirit that humans have to support each other.
In the streets of Waverly, everyone RNZ spoke to had some sort of connection to one, if not all, of the 4 locals killed in Wednesday's crash. Jimmy Antler says he keeps to himself mostly, but met Ian Porteous just over a year and a half ago. He says Mr Porteous made an instant impression.
Oh, lovely man. A real good guy, a dag, eh?
So he had a good sense of humour?
Yeah, no, he had a good sense of humour. Always when he drove past my property, because like I said, I kept it to myself, when he'd see me, he'd give me a big smile. Just his aura, just his sense of well-being. He always looked happy.
Aura Keane's neighbour David Moss says she'd always say hello. He knew her and Brenda Williams through old family connections. Mr Moss describes both as wonderful people and says the town's reeling.
It's only a small community, and so it doesn't take long to get around, and take a little while, I think, but we come to terms with everything, but time heals all wounds, but it's going to take a while.
He says the people of Waverly are good at helping each other out.
Waverly always comes to the help of the victims like that. We can only give our support if it's needed, and to the family, and we pass our condolences over to all the family. And I can say is Waverly's devastated. That's about all I can say. We're all devastated about it.
Meanwhile, the sole survivor from the other vehicle, Ani Nohi, remains in Wellington Hospital. The body of her 8-year-old daughter, Nivek Madams, has been flown from Waikato Hospital to Wellington to be near her mother. Ms Nohi's partner, 28-year-old Jeremy Thompson, and their 8-week-old baby Shady Thompson were also killed in the crash. For Checkpoint, Laura Dooney.
The European Union is at a crossroads over how to manage the region's migration crisis. EU leaders have held an emergency meeting in Brussels to find a solution, but Italy has been accused of stalling progress. Now under the control of a distinctly anti-EU coalition, Italy's even refused to sign up to the summit communique until its demands for a new migration policy are met. This from the ABC.
A growing anti-immigration sentiment is forcing the European Union to introduce tougher immigration policies, but its members are divided on how to do it. At an EU leaders' meeting in Brussels, German Chancellor Angela Merkel called for a unified solution.
The talks will be about external border protection, and from my side we can talk about landing ships of migrants in other countries, for example in North Africa. But we need to talk with these countries. We can't do this over their heads.
One idea is to screen migrants in North Africa for asylum eligibility. It could involve a virtual wall where people trying to leave for Europe are put in centres in Algeria, Egypt, Libya and Morocco. African countries have not yet agreed to the plan. The EU was expected to put out a joint statement at the end of the leaders' summit, but Italy's new Prime Minister, Giuseppe Conte, has refused to sign up. His country is shouldering most of the load of the arrivals, and he wants more help to deal with it. On migration.
As you know, Italy has worked on a proposal which it brings to this European Council. A proposal we believe is completely reasonable because it is in line with the spirit and the principle on which the European Union is based. Italy no longer has a need for words and statements. We need concrete acts.
Italy's refusal is a serious problem for EU unity on the issue. EU Foreign Police Chief Federica Mogherini has pointed out that the flow of migrants has actually decreased since 2015.
Our policies in the last year or so have started to produce results. Now they need to be sustained.
But Italy is not the only EU country that is adopting hardline anti-migrant policies. Hungary has deployed troops to its border and erected a razor-wire fence to keep migrants out. Prime Minister Viktor Orban.
And I think the people request two things. First is no migrants more in, so stop them. And the second is those who are in should bring back. So that's what the people will.
The failure to come up with a plan on migration could be dangerous for Angela Merkel in Germany. She's worried the far-right alternative will close borders to migrants and trigger the end of the EU's open cross-border business and travel policy.
That report from the ABC's Catherine Gregory. Just before we go tonight, lots of the rest of the country saying, shut up, Auckland, your petrol will still be cheaper after the regional fuel tax than it is where we live now. And this from Margaret Griffin. We're doing a lot on youth offending. 2 17-year-olds, of course, are jailed for life for murder in Hawke's Bay. We covered that earlier. Margaret says it's hard listening to the plans hatched to kill someone by the 17-year-olds, coupled with the stories you've been fronting about young offenders on the way to redemption. How do we make sense of all this? I want redemption to be real and a possible path for all, but it seems so ephemeral and so hard. Is there any way we can save these kids? Good question. Thank you. See you Monday.
RNZ News headlines. At 6:30, nurses have called off next Thursday's strike and will meet to discuss a new pay offer on Monday. Justice Muir says a 3 strikes period of 55 years would have been manifestly unjust for murderer Turia Rangita, who he has sentenced to a minimum of 17 years in jail. Teenager Rosie Lewis has pleaded guilty at the High Court in Napier to robbing and murdering Indian student Sandeep Dhiman last year. And Aucklanders have been queuing up at petrol stations ahead of a regional fuel tax that kicks in on Sunday. Our next news and weather at 7.
This Sunday morning, a full hour with writer Witi Ihamaira and some of his toughest days.
I had been happily married and I had 2 children, but I knew that it was time for me to address the gay nature of my life.
And Fijian cake maker Bird Jang has come a long way since his first baking effort.
I was watching